In the winter of 1899, 45 patients entered the private sanitarium of Dr. Heinrich Vollmer in Aurora, Illinois, seeking treatment for tuberculosis. None would leave alive. What they didn't know was that their trusted physician had been systematically poisoning them with mercury and arsenic compounds, not to cure them, but to test his own experimental antidote. The snow fell heavy that December evening when Margaret O'Brien, a seamstress from Chicago, arrived at the Vollmer Institute for consumptive care. She clutched a single suitcase and a letter from her family physician, recommending Dr. Vollmer as the most innovative tuberculosis specialist in the American Midwest. The ornate Victorian mansion that housed the sanitarium stood like a monument against the Illinois prairie, its windows glowing amber in the twilight. Margaret had no way of knowing she was walking into what would later be called the most methodical medical murder in American history. Dr. Heinrich Vollmer was not like other physicians of his era. Trained in Berlin and Vienna, he had arrived in Aurora in 1897 with impressive credentials and radical ideas about treating consumption. The 38-year-old German immigrant possessed an unsettling combination of brilliant medical knowledge and complete moral detachment. His patients described him as eerily calm, with pale blue eyes that seemed to look through rather than at them. He spoke in measured tones about revolutionary treatments, always emphasizing that his methods required absolute trust and secrecy. The Vollmer Institute occupied a converted mansion on the outskirts of town, surrounded by manicured gardens that created an illusion of tranquility. Inside, however, the atmosphere was suffocating. Heavy curtains blocked most natural light, and the air carried the constant scent of carbolic acid mixed with something else, something metallic and unsettling. Vollmer had designed every aspect of the facility to isolate his patients from the outside world. Visitors were discouraged, mail was screened, and patients were told that contact with the outside world would hinder their recovery. Margaret's first weeks at the Institute followed a predictable routine. She received what Vollmer called preparatory treatments, a series of injections and medications designed to strengthen the constitution before the primary cure. The other patients whispered about the doctor's methods, sharing stories of fellow inmates who had initially improved before taking mysterious turns for the worse. Sarah Brennan, a young mother from Peoria, had been at the Institute for 3 months. She confided to Margaret that several patients had died after receiving Vollmer's advanced treatment, but their families had been told they succumbed to complications of their tuberculosis. What none of the patients knew was that Vollmer was conducting a horrific experiment. He had developed what he believed was a universal antidote to heavy metal poisoning, a compound he called Vita-Mercurium. But to prove its effectiveness, he needed subjects who had been poisoned with mercury and arsenic compounds. Rather than wait for accidental poisoning cases, Vollmer had decided to create his own. The doctor's method was diabolically systematic. He would admit patients with genuine tuberculosis, then slowly introduce mercury and arsenic compounds into their treatment regimen. As the heavy metals accumulated in their systems, patients would experience what appeared to be a worsening of their tuberculosis symptoms: weakness, weight loss, respiratory distress. When their condition became critical, Vollmer would administer his experimental antidote, carefully documenting the results in a leather-bound journal he kept locked in his office safe. The first recorded victim was Thomas Hendley, a railroad worker from Springfield who arrived at the Institute in February 1899. Vollmer's journal, later discovered by authorities, contains chilling entries about Hendley's treatment. Subject exhibits expected mercury toxicity symptoms after 6 weeks of graduated doses, Vollmer wrote in his precise handwriting. Administered Vita-Mercurium compound. Subject expired within 48 hours. Dosage may require adjustment. By spring of 1899, the death rate at the Vollmer Institute had reached alarming levels, but the doctor had crafted a perfect cover story. He convinced grieving families that their loved ones had contracted a particularly virulent strain of tuberculosis, one that resisted conventional treatment. He spoke eloquently about the brave souls who had volunteered for experimental procedures, emphasizing that their sacrifice would advance medical science. Several families even thanked him for his efforts, never suspecting that their relatives had been murdered. The truth might have remained hidden forever if not for Eleanor Whitman, a nurse who had been working at the institute since its opening. Whitman had grown increasingly suspicious of the high mortality rate and Vollmer's secretive behavior. She began keeping her own records, noting discrepancies between the doctor's reported causes of death and the symptoms she observed in patients. In her private diary, she wrote, "Dr. V administers treatments in complete isolation. Patients who receive his special medicine invariably deteriorate rapidly. I fear something terrible is happening here."
The summer of 1899 brought a surge of new patients to the Institute, including several members of the Morrison family from Rockford. James Morrison, a merchant, had brought his wife and 2 adult children to Vollmer after hearing testimonials about the doctor's success rate. The family's arrival marked the beginning of what would become Vollmer's most ambitious and devastating experiment yet. Vollmer had refined his poisoning technique by this time, using a combination of mercury chloride and arsenic trioxide dissolved in a sweet-tasting syrup he called respiratory tonic. Patients eagerly consumed the medicine, believing it was helping their lungs heal. The Morrison family received daily doses of the poisoned syrup, along with mercury-laced injections disguised as vitamin supplements. Within weeks, the entire Morrison family began exhibiting symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, tremors, hair loss, severe digestive distress, and neurological problems. Vollmer documented their decline with scientific detachment, noting how different dosages affected each family member differently. The elder Morrison shows remarkable resistance to mercury accumulation, he wrote, increasing daily dose to 50 milligrams. Younger subjects more responsive to treatment protocol. Eleanor Whitman watched helplessly as the Morrison family deteriorated. She had tried to voice her concerns to local authorities, but Vollmer's reputation and political connections had protected him. The doctor had cultivated relationships with influential figures in Aurora and Chicago, presenting himself as a progressive physician who was revolutionizing tuberculosis treatment. Any criticism was dismissed as professional jealousy or misunderstanding of his advanced methods. The breakthrough came when Whitman discovered Vollmer's journal during a late-night search of his office. The detailed records of his poisoning experiments, complete with dosage calculations and mortality statistics, provided irrefutable evidence of his crimes. The journal revealed that Vollmer had successfully developed an antidote that could counteract mercury and arsenic poisoning, but only in about 15% of cases. The remaining 85% of his test subjects had died, their deaths carefully documented as research data. Most disturbing was Vollmer's clinical analysis of his own actions. He showed no remorse for the murders, instead expressing frustration that his antidote hadn't proven more effective. "The pursuit of medical knowledge requires sacrifice," he wrote. "These subjects have contributed more to science in death than they ever could have in life. History will vindicate this research when Vita-Mercurium saves thousands of lives." Whitman's evidence reached the authorities in September 1899, just as the Morrison family was entering the final stages of their poisoning. A coordinated raid on the Vollmer Institute found 15 patients in various stages of mercury and arsenic toxicity. The scene that greeted investigators was nightmarish. Patients writhing in agony, their bodies racked with the effects of heavy metal poisoning, while their trusted physician continued to administer his treatments with calm professionalism. The Morrison family became the final victims of Vollmer's experiment. Despite attempts to treat their poisoning with conventional methods, the accumulated toxins had caused irreversible damage. James Morrison died on September 15th, followed by his wife 2 days later. Their children succumbed within the week, their deaths marking the end of Vollmer's killing spree. The trial of Dr. Heinrich Vollmer became a sensation in the American press. Newspapers across the country reported on the monster of Aurora, the trusted physician who had systematically murdered his patients in the name of science. The prosecution presented evidence of 45 confirmed deaths, all linked to Vollmer's experimental poisoning program. The defense argued that Vollmer was a brilliant scientist whose methods were simply ahead of his time, a claim that outraged the public and the families of his victims. Vollmer himself remained unrepentant throughout the trial. When asked to explain his actions, he calmly stated, "I have advanced medical science by decades. My antidote, when perfected, will save countless lives. The subjects who died served a noble purpose, even if they couldn't understand it at the time." His complete lack of remorse only strengthened the prosecution's case and horrified observers. The evidence against Vollmer was overwhelming. Eleanor Whitman's testimony, supported by his own detailed journal entries, painted a picture of calculated murder disguised as medical treatment. Toxicology reports confirmed that all 45 victims had died from mercury and arsenic poisoning, not tuberculosis complications, as Vollmer had claimed. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Heinrich Vollmer was sentenced to death by hanging, carried out on March 12, 1900. Even on the gallows, he maintained that his work would eventually be recognized as groundbreaking medical research. His final words were reportedly, "Science will vindicate my methods when the world is ready to understand them."
The Vollmer Institute was closed immediately after the trial, its Victorian mansion later demolished. The site remained empty for decades, locals claiming it was cursed by the spirits of Vollmer's victims. Eleanor Whitman, the nurse whose courage had exposed the murders, left Illinois shortly after the trial and never spoke publicly about her experiences at the Institute. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of Vollmer's correspondence with other physicians across Europe and America. His letters revealed a network of doctors who shared his belief that medical advancement justified extreme measures. Several colleagues had expressed interest in his mercury antidote research, with at least 3 requesting samples of his Vita-Mercurium compound for their own experiments. The Vollmer case highlighted the dangers of unregulated medical practice in the late 19th century. The incident led to stricter oversight of private sanitariums and requirements for external validation of experimental treatments. However, it also raised uncomfortable questions about the ethics of medical experimentation that continue to resonate today. Modern medical historians have studied Vollmer's research methods and found them to be scientifically sound, despite their horrific application. His systematic approach to testing his antidote, while morally reprehensible, followed proper experimental protocols. This paradox, brilliant scientific method applied to mass murder, makes the Vollmer case particularly disturbing for contemporary medical professionals. The victims of the Vollmer Institute were buried in a special section of Aurora's Riverside Cemetery, their headstones bearing only their names and dates of death. No mention was made of how they died, perhaps in an attempt to allow them some dignity in death. The Morrison family plot includes a small monument that reads, "Taken too soon by trusted hands." What happened at the Vollmer Institute remains one of the most chilling examples of medical ethics gone wrong in American history. The case serves as a stark reminder that scientific progress must never come at the cost of human dignity and life. It also illustrates how easily trust can be weaponized by those who view human beings as mere test subjects. The 45 patients who died at Vollmer's hands had placed their faith in a system designed to heal them. Instead, they became unwitting participants in a grotesque experiment that prioritized scientific curiosity over human life. Their deaths serve as a permanent warning about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of maintaining rigorous ethical standards in medical practice. Today, the site of the former Vollmer Institute is occupied by a small park. A modest plaque commemorates the victims, though it provides no details about how they died. Local residents often leave flowers there, particularly on the anniversary of the raid that ended Vollmer's killing spree. Its inscription reads simply, "In memory of those who trusted and were betrayed." The legacy of Heinrich Vollmer extends beyond his immediate victims. His case contributed to the development of modern medical ethics, informed consent protocols, and oversight mechanisms that protect patients from exploitation. Yet it also serves as a sobering reminder that the capacity for evil exists within even the most trusted professions. As we reflect on this dark chapter in medical history, we must ask ourselves, what safeguards exist today to prevent another Heinrich Vollmer? How can we ensure that the pursuit of scientific knowledge never again becomes justification for the systematic murder of those who seek our help? The victims of the Vollmer Institute deserve more than historical footnotes. They deserve to be remembered as individuals who sought healing and instead found betrayal. Their deaths remind us that medical ethics are not mere guidelines, but essential protections for human dignity and life itself. In the end, Heinrich Vollmer's contribution to medical science was not his mercury antidote, but rather the hard-learned lesson that scientific progress without moral foundation is not progress at all. It is merely sophisticated barbarism disguised as healing. What do you think? Could something like this happen today with our modern medical safeguards? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark chapters from medical history. What state are you watching from? Let me know. I love hearing from viewers around the world who are fascinated by these forgotten stories of medicine gone wrong.